Hello horror lovers, welcome to the channel. Before the terror begins, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, as it will help me a lot. Also, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from, I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because the sun dipped below the tree line as I hammered the last tent peg into the soft earth. A cool breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying the scent of pine and damp soil. I straightened up, wiping sweat from my brow, and surveyed my campsite with a mix of pride and growing unease. "You've got this, Tom," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread that had been dogging me since I'd entered the forest. "It's just a weekend camping trip, nothing to worry about." I busied myself with gathering firewood, the task helping to calm my nerves. As twilight deepened into night, I got a small fire going, its warmth a welcome comfort against the chill that had settled over the clearing. The flames cast flickering shadows across the surrounding trees, creating an ever-shifting landscape of light and dark. Settling into my camp chair, I pulled out my phone to check for a signal. No bars. I was truly alone out here. "Great," I sighed, pocketing the device. So much for checking in with Sarah. My girlfriend had been against this solo trip from the start. "I don't like the idea of you out there all alone," she'd said, worry etching lines across her forehead. "What if something happens?" I'd laughed off her concerns, assuring her I'd be fine. Now, as the forest grew darker and more oppressive around me, I wished I'd listened to her. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond my campfire's glow. I jerked upright, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast wilderness. "Is someone there?" Only the crackle of the fire and the faint hooting of an owl answered me. I chuckled nervously, trying to dispel the tension. "Get a grip, Tom. It's probably just a squirrel or something." Despite my attempts at self-reassurance, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows at the edge of the clearing seemed to pulse and writhe, hiding untold dangers. I found myself straining to catch any sound that might betray the presence of another person, or something worse. As the night wore on, my paranoia grew. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig sent my heart racing. I tried to distract myself by roasting marshmallows and telling myself stories, but the words died on my lips as my imagination conjured increasingly terrifying scenarios. Finally, exhaustion began to outweigh my fear. I doused the fire and retreated to my tent, zipping the entrance closed with shaking hands. Inside the nylon cocoon, I felt marginally safer, though sleep remained elusive. I must have dozed off at some point because I jolted awake with a start, disoriented and heart-pounding. Something had woken me, a sound, a presence, I wasn't sure. But the air felt different, charged with a palpable malevolence. "Who's out there?" I called, my voice cracking with fear. Silence answered me, but it was a loaded silence, pregnant with menace. I fumbled for my flashlight, my sweaty palms making it difficult to grip. As I flicked it on, the beam caught a flicker of movement just outside the tent, my breath caught in my throat. There was definitely someone, or something, out there. With trembling fingers, I slowly unzipped the tent flap, each metallic click of the zipper sounding impossibly loud in the stillness of the night. I poked my head out, sweeping the flashlight beam across the clearing. At first I saw nothing. Then a movement at the edge of the light caught my eye. I swung the beam towards it and my blood ran cold. A figure stood at the tree line, hooded and motionless. The black fabric of their cloak seemed to absorb the light, creating a void in the shape of a person. "Hello?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure remained silent, but slowly raised an arm, pointing directly at me. I scrambled out of the tent, my fight-or-flight response screaming at me to run. But before I could move, the figure was upon me, moving with impossible speed. I caught a glimpse of gleaming eyes beneath the hood, filled with an inhuman malice that chilled me to my core. "No, please," I began, but my words were cut short as something hard connected with my skull. Pain exploded behind my eyes and the world tilted sideways. As consciousness slipped away, my last thought was of Sarah and how I should have listened to her warnings. Then, darkness claimed me, and I knew no more. Consciousness returned slowly, like wading through a thick fog. My head throbbed with each pulse of my heart, and the darkness pressing against my eyelids was absolute. For a moment I thought I might still be dreaming. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. The sound seemed to die inches from my lips, swallowed by the oppressive blackness. As awareness crept back, panic began to set in. This wasn't my tent. This wasn't anywhere I recognized. The air was stale and heavy, carrying an underlying stench that made my stomach churn. I tried to sit up, but my head spun violently, forcing me back down. My hands scrabbled against the ground, seeking any clue to my surroundings. The surface beneath me was hard-packed earth, cool and slightly damp. "Okay, Tom, think," I muttered to myself, trying to keep the rising hysteria at bay. "What's the last thing you remember?" Images flashed through my mind. The campsite, the fire, the hooded figure. A chill ran down my spine as I recalled those gleaming, malevolent eyes. "Help!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Can anyone hear me? Please help!" My cries echoed strangely, suggesting I was in some kind of enclosed space. But how big? And where? Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself to a sitting position. The movement sent waves of nausea through me, and I retched, bringing up nothing but bile. As I wiped my mouth with a shaking hand, my fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. Curious and apprehensive, I ran my hand along the object. It was long and cylindrical, with odd protrusions at one end. With dawning horror, I realized what I was touching. "No," I whispered, recoiling. "No, no, no." It was a bone, a human bone. As if triggered by this realization, my eyes began to adjust to the darkness. Shapes emerged from the gloom, and I wished fervently that I could return to blessed blindness. I was surrounded by bones. Skulls grinned at me from the shadows, femurs and ribs scattered around like macabre puzzle pieces. The stench of decay hit me full force, and I gagged again. "This can't be happening," I said, my voice rising in pitch as panic took hold. "This isn't real. Wake up, Tom. Wake up." But no matter how much I pleaded with myself, the nightmare didn't end. I was trapped in what appeared to be a deep pit, the walls rising at least 15 feet above me. A faint circle of lighter darkness far above suggested an opening, but it was hopelessly out of reach. "Hello?" I called again, desperation lending strength to my voice. "Is anyone up there? Please, I'm trapped down here." Only silence answered me. I was alone with the dead. As the full weight of my situation settled on me, I felt my sanity begin to fray. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the protesting ache in my head, and began to pace the small confines of my prison. Think, I muttered, running my hands through my hair. There has to be a way out. People don't just disappear into holes in the ground. But the evidence surrounding me suggested otherwise. How many others had found themselves in this pit? How long had their bones lain here, forgotten and undiscovered? A hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. "Well, Tom, you wanted an adventure. Bet Sarah never saw this coming when she worried about your camping trip." Sarah. The thought of her sent a pang through my heart. Would I ever see her again? Would anyone even know where to look for me? As despair threatened to overwhelm me, a new emotion began to take hold. Determination. I wasn't going to die here, forgotten in a hole in the ground. I was going to find a way out, no matter what it took. I approached the earthen wall, running my hands along its surface. It was mostly smooth, but here and there I could feel roots protruding. Maybe, just maybe, I could use them to climb. "All right," I said, steeling myself for the effort ahead. "Let's do this." I grasped the nearest root and pulled myself up, searching for footholds in the packed earth. It was slow, agonizing work. My muscles screamed in protest, and more than once I slipped. crashing back down among the bones. But each time I fell, I got back up. Each failure only fueled my determination. As I climbed, I spoke to myself, to Sarah, to anyone who might be listening. "I'm not dying here," I grunted, pulling myself up another few inches. "You hear me? I'm getting out of this pit. I'm finding my way home, and then I'm never going camping again." Inch by painstaking inch, I ascended towards the faint light above. Freedom was within reach. I just had to keep climbing. My muscles screamed in protest as I inched my way up the earthen wall. Sweat stung my eyes, and my fingers bled from clawing at the unforgiving surface, but I refused to give up. The faint glimmer of moonlight above was my beacon, my promise of salvation. "Come on, Tom," I grunted through gritted teeth. "Just a little further." I reached for another handhold, a gnarled root protruding from the packed soil. As my weight shifted, the root snapped with a sickening crack. For a heart-stopping moment, I hung suspended, scrabbling desperately for purchase. "No, no, no," I cried out as I felt myself falling. I crashed back down to the bottom of the pit, landing hard among the scattered bones. Pain lanced through my body, and for a moment, I lay there, gasping for breath and fighting back tears of frustration. "Damn it!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the confined space. I was so close. As the initial shock of the fall wore off, I took stock of my injuries. Nothing seemed broken, but every part of me ached. I'd be black and blue tomorrow, if I lived to see tomorrow. The thought sent a fresh wave of determination coursing through me. I couldn't give up. I wouldn't become another set of bones in this godforsaken hole. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I dragged myself to my feet and faced the wall once more. "All right, you bastard," I muttered, eyeing the treacherous climb. Round 2. This time I was more careful, testing each handhold before trusting it with my full weight. My progress was agonizingly slow, but steadily I ascended. The circle of light grew larger and a cool breeze kissed my sweat-soaked face. Just as my arms began to shake uncontrollably from the exertion, my hand grasped the edge of the pit. With a final Herculean effort, I hauled myself over the rim and collapsed onto solid ground. For several minutes, I lay there, gulping in great lungfuls of fresh air. The forest floor had never felt so welcoming. Tears of relief streamed down my face as I laughed and sobbed simultaneously. "I did it," I wheezed. "I actually did it." But my relief was short-lived. As I pushed myself to a sitting position, the reality of my situation came crashing back. I was alive, yes, but I was still lost in the middle of a forest with no idea where I was or how I'd gotten here. And somewhere out there was the person, or thing, that had put me in that pit. The thought sent a chill down my spine, instantly putting me on high alert. I scrambled to my feet, wincing at the protest from my battered body. "Okay, think," I said to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. "Which way is out?" The forest looked the same in every direction, an impenetrable wall of dark trees and undergrowth. I had no idea where my original campsite was, or how far I'd been taken. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness, and I whirled around, heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my attempt at bravery. Silence answered me, but I could feel eyes watching from the shadows. Whether animal or human, I couldn't tell, but I knew I couldn't stay here. "Right," I muttered. "Time to go." I picked a direction at random and started running. Branches whipped at my face and roots threatened to trip me, but I pressed on, driven by pure adrenaline and the desperate need to escape. I had no plan beyond putting as much distance as possible between myself and that pit of horrors. My mind raced with questions. Who had attacked me? Why had they left me in that hole? Were there others? As I ran, I tried to piece together a coherent thought. "Sarah," I panted. "Got to find a road, call Sarah." The thought of her gave me renewed energy. I pictured her face, imagined the relief in her eyes when I returned safely. It spurred me on, even as my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the dark forest, but eventually, my body reached its limit. I stumbled and fell, crashing to the forest floor. For a moment I lay there, chest heaving as I fought to catch my breath. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest. But I knew I couldn't stop. Not yet. Forcing myself to my feet once more, I leaned against a tree, trying to orient myself. "Come on," I whispered hoarsely. "There's got to be a way out." As if in answer to my plea, I caught a faint sound in the distance. It was barely audible over my labored breathing, but it was there, the unmistakable hum of a car engine. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I staggered towards the sound, pushing through the underbrush with renewed vigor. "Please," I muttered, "please let this be real." The trees began to thin, and suddenly I burst out onto a deserted road. The pavement was rough under my bare feet, but it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. I waved my arms frantically, praying the driver would stop. As the car slowed to a halt, relief washed over me in an overwhelming wave. I was found. I was safe. But even as I collapsed to my knees, grateful tears streaming down my face, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a chilling reminder. The nightmare might be over, but the mystery was just beginning. The headlights of the approaching car blinded me, and I squinted against their harsh glare. My legs, pushed beyond their limits, finally gave out. I collapsed to my knees on the rough asphalt, one arm raised in a desperate plea for help. The car screeched to a halt, and I heard a door slam. Footsteps approached rapidly. "Oh my God, are you all right?" A woman's voice called out, filled with concern. I tried to respond, but my parched throat produced only a raspy croak. The woman came into view, her features blurred by my exhaustion and the bright lights behind her. "Frank, call 911, she shouted over her shoulder. Then, turning back to me, she knelt down. "It's okay. We're going to get you help. Can you tell me your name?" I swallowed hard, forcing words past my dry lips. "Tom," I managed. "My name's Tom." "Okay, Tom, I'm Linda. Can you tell me what happened to you?" The events of the past hours came rushing back, and I felt panic rising in my chest. "I was camping," I began, my words tumbling out in a rush. "Someone attacked me. There was a pit, full of bones. I climbed out, ran through the forest." Linda's expression shifted from concern to confusion, then to alarm. "Bones? Tom, are you sure? Were you injured?" Before I could answer, an older man, presumably Frank, approached, phone in hand. "Ambulance is on its way," he reported. "They said to keep him still and try to keep him calm." I shook my head vehemently. "No, you don't understand. We have to go back. There's evidence. People need to know." "Shh, it's okay," Linda soothed, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The police will investigate. Right now, we need to get you checked out." As if on cue, I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. The adrenaline that had kept me going began to ebb, and the full weight of my ordeal crashed down upon me. My vision swam, and I swayed where I knelt. Tom, stay with us." Linda's voice seemed to come from far away. The world tilted sideways and everything faded to black. I drifted in and out of consciousness, catching snippets of conversation and flashes of activity around me. The whine of the ambulance siren. Paramedics asking questions. The sterile white of a hospital ceiling. When I finally came to fully, I found myself in a hospital bed, an IV drip in my arm, and monitors beeping softly nearby. Sunlight streamed through a window, suggesting I'd been out for hours. A nurse noticed I was awake and approached with a smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson. How are you feeling?" I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. "Confused," I admitted. "Sore. What happened?" You were brought in early this morning in a state of severe dehydration and exhaustion, she explained. You've been sleeping for about 12 hours. The doctor will be by shortly to check on you, and there are some police officers waiting to speak with you when you're up to it. The mention of police brought everything rushing back. The pit, I gasped, trying to sit up. Did they find it? Did anyone believe me? The nurse gently pushed me back onto the pillows. Easy there. I don't know the details, but I'm sure the police will fill you in. For now, you need to rest. As if summoned by our conversation, a doctor entered the room, followed closely by 2 police officers. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, introduced himself as Dr. Patel and began checking my vitals. You gave us quite a scare, Mr. Henderson, he said as he worked. But you're going to be just fine. Some rest and fluids and you'll be back on your feet in no time. One of the police officers, a stern-looking woman with short gray hair, stepped forward. Mr. Henderson, I'm Detective Simmons. When you're feeling up to it, we'd like to ask you some questions about what happened to you. I nodded, eager to share my story. I'm ready now. Please, you have to believe me. There's a pit in the forest full of human remains. Someone attacked me, knocked me out, and left me there. Detective Simmons exchanged a glance with her partner. We've had search parties combing the area where you were found, Mr. Henderson. So far, they haven't discovered any evidence of what you're describing. My heart sank. But it's there. I swear it. I can show you. Dr. Patel interjected, his voice gentle but firm. Mr. Henderson, you've been through a traumatic experience. Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us when we're under extreme stress. I shook my head vehemently. No, you don't understand. It was real. All of it was real. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. As the reality of my situation sank in, a new kind of fear gripped me. What if they never found evidence of what happened? What if no one ever believed me? As Detective Simmons began asking more questions, I realized my ordeal was far from over. The nightmare in the forest might have ended, but a new one was just beginning. The struggle to uncover the truth and prove that I wasn't crazy. With each question, each skeptical look, I felt the weight of my experience pressing down on me. I was alive, yes, but at what cost? And what dark secrets still lurked in those woods waiting to be uncovered? The sterile hospital room became my world for the next few days. Time blurred, marked only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the comings and goings of medical staff. My body slowly recovered, but my mind remained trapped in a loop of that horrifying night. On the 3rd day, as I picked at another bland hospital meal, Detective Simmons returned. Her face was a mask of professional neutrality as she pulled up a chair beside my bed. Mr. Henderson, she began, her tone carefully measured. I hope you're feeling better. I have some updates on our investigation. I set aside my tray, heart pounding. Did you find the pit? The bones? She shook her head slowly. I'm afraid not, Mr. Henderson. We've conducted an extensive search of the area where you were found. There's no evidence of any pit or human remains. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. I know what I saw, what I experienced. It was real. Detective Simmons leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. Tom, I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. We take claims like yours very seriously, but making false reports is a crime. False reports? I sputtered, anger rising. You think I'm lying. Why would I make this up? She held up a placating hand. I'm not accusing you of anything, but we need to consider all possibilities. The doctors mentioned you were severely dehydrated and possibly hallucinating when you were found. I shook my head vehemently. No, it wasn't a hallucination. I climbed out of that pit. I felt the bones. I smelled the decay. It was real. A flicker of something, pity perhaps, crossed the detective's face. Tom, is it possible that the stress of being lost in the woods, combined with your physical state, could have caused you to imagine these things? No, I shouted, frustration boiling over. Why won't anyone believe me? A nurse poked her head in, alarmed by my outburst. Detective Simmons waved her off, then turned back to me with a sigh. Look, Tom, I want to believe you, but without evidence, there's little we can do. We'll keep the case open for now, but... She trailed off, the implication clear. As she left, I sank back into my pillows, a wave of despair washing over me. Was I losing my mind? Had it all been some trauma-induced delusion? Later that evening, a soft knock at my door roused me from my brooding. Sarah, my girlfriend, entered, her face a mix of relief and worry. "Tom," she breathed, rushing to my bedside. "Oh God, I was so worried. Are you okay?" I managed a weak smile. "Hey, Sarah. I'm alive, at least." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "What happened out there? They're saying you got lost, but the things you told the police..." I tensed, searching her face for signs of doubt. "You believe me, don't you, Sarah? About the pit, the attack?" Sarah hesitated, and my heart sank. I want to, Tom. But it all sounds so incredible. And the police haven't found anything." "Not you too," I groaned, pulling my hand away. "I'm not crazy, Sarah. I know what happened to me." She reached out, her expression pleading. "I'm not saying you're crazy, but maybe your mind was playing tricks on you. The doctors said you were in pretty bad shape when they found you." I turned away, staring out the window at the setting sun. I can't believe this. No one believes me. Not the police, not the doctors, not even you. "Tom, please," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "We're just worried about you. Maybe talking to someone could help? The hospital has excellent therapists." "I don't need a therapist," I snapped, regretting it instantly as I saw Sarah flinch. I softened my tone. "I'm sorry. I need you to trust me on this. Something happened out there, something terrible. And whoever did this to me is still out there." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Okay, Tom. I'll try to keep an open mind. But please, promise me you'll at least consider talking to someone? For me?" I nodded reluctantly, not trusting myself to speak. Sarah leaned in and kissed my forehead before leaving, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. As night fell, I found myself alone with my thoughts once more. Doubt crept in, insidious and persistent. What if they were right? What if it had all been in my head? No, I thought, clenching my fists. I know what I experienced. It was real, and I'll prove it, no matter what it takes. But as I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a terrifying question. What if I really am losing my grip on reality? The days ahead loomed, filled with uncertainty and the daunting task of uncovering the truth, not just for the world, but for my own sanity. The familiar creak of my apartment door felt surreal as I stepped inside for the first time in what felt like ages. The air was stale, mail piled up on the counter, a stark reminder of the life I'd left behind before my ill-fated camping trip. Sarah followed me in, her presence both comforting and somehow distant. "Do you want me to stay for a while?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No, it's okay. I think I just need some time alone to readjust." She nodded, hesitating before leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Call me if you need anything, okay? Anything at all." As the door closed behind her, the silence of the apartment enveloped me. I stood there for a moment, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Everything looked the same, and yet nothing felt right. I wandered into the bedroom, my eyes falling on the camping gear still piled in the corner. A shudder ran through me, and I quickly turned away, unable to face the memories it evoked. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions of everyday life, but my mind constantly drifted back to that night in the forest. The pit, the bones, the hooded figure. It all felt so vivid, so real. How could it have been a hallucination? My phone buzzed incessantly with messages and calls from concerned friends and family, but I found myself retreating further into isolation. Each interaction felt like a minefield, fraught with the potential for disbelief or pity. One afternoon, as I mindlessly flipped through TV channels, a news report caught my attention. Local authorities are still searching for 2 hikers who went missing in the Oakwood Forest area last week, the reporter announced. John Daniels and Maria Cortez were last seen entering the trailhead on Friday morning. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. Oakwood Forest, that's where I had been camping. Could there be a connection? Grabbing my laptop, I began frantically searching for more information. As I dug deeper, a chill ran down my spine. There had been other disappearances in the area over the years, more than could be explained by typical hiking accidents. I knew it, I muttered to myself. I'm not crazy. Something is happening in those woods. Energized by this potential lead, I reached for my phone to call Detective Simmons. But as my finger hovered over her number, doubt crept in. Would she even listen to me? Or would this just reinforce her belief that I was becoming obsessed? The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by frustration and fear. A knock at the door startled me out of my spiral. Cautiously, I approached and peered through the peephole. It was Mike, my best friend since college. I hesitated, then slowly opened the door. Mike's usually cheerful face was creased with worry. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Thought I'd check in on you. Can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. Mike looked around the apartment, taking in the unwashed dishes and scattered papers covered in my frantic notes. "Tom," he began carefully, "we're all really worried about you. Sarah says you've been isolating yourself, not returning calls." "I'm fine." I cut him off more sharply than I intended. "I just need some time to process everything." Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, man, I can't even imagine what you went through out there, but shutting everyone out isn't the answer." I felt a flicker of anger. "You don't believe me either, do you? About what happened in the forest?" Mike hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I believe that you believe it happened, but Tom, you have to admit it sounds pretty far-fetched." "Far-fetched?" I repeated, my voice rising. 2 hikers just went missing in the same forest, Mike. There's something going on out there and nobody will listen to me." Mike's eyes widened in alarm. "Whoa, Tom, calm down. What are you talking about?" I grabbed my laptop, shoving it towards him. "Look, all these disappearances over the years. It can't be a coincidence. I have to go back. I have to find proof." "Go back?" Mike exclaimed, grabbing my arm. "Tom, you can't be serious. You nearly died out there." I wrenched my arm free. "I have to, Mike. It's the only way to prove I'm not crazy, to make people believe me." Mike stared at me for a long moment, his expression a mix of concern and resignation. "Okay," he said finally. "If you're determined to do this, at least let me help. We'll figure this out together, all right?" Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a surge of determination. Finally, someone was willing to listen, to help. As Mike and I began to plan our next steps, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Was I leading my best friend into danger? But I pushed the thought aside. I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. Little did I know, our search for answers would uncover secrets far darker and more terrifying than I could have imagined. The soft glow of my laptop screen illuminated the cluttered living room as I pored over maps and reports, my eyes burning from hours of intense focus. Empty coffee cups littered the table, testament to my obsessive research. Mike sat across from me, his face etched with concern as he watched me work. "Tom," he said gently, breaking the tense silence, "it's 3 a.m. Don't you think we should call it a night?" I shook my head, not looking up from the screen. "Just a little longer. I think I'm onto something here." Mike sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You've been saying that for hours. What exactly are we looking for?" I finally tore my gaze away from the laptop, meeting Mike's tired eyes. Patterns, Mike. Disappearances, strange sightings, anything out of the ordinary in that forest. Look at this. I turned the screen towards him, pointing at a map covered in red pins. Each of these marks represents a reported disappearance or unexplained incident in Oakwood Forest over the past 50 years. Notice anything? Mike leaned in, squinting at the map. His eyes widened as he saw what I had discovered. They're clustered, all in the same general area. I nodded eagerly. Exactly. And guess where my campsite was located? Right in the middle of it all, Mike whispered, a chill evident in his voice. As we sat there, processing the implications of our discovery, a notification popped up on my screen. An email from an unknown sender. Curiosity piqued, I opened it. The message was brief and cryptic. You're not alone. Others have seen. Meet at Rosie's Diner tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. Mike read the message over my shoulder, his brow furrowing. Tom, this could be dangerous. You don't know who sent this. I felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. But what if they have answers? What if they've experienced something similar? Or it could be a trap, Mike countered, set by whoever attacked you in the forest. I considered his words, weighing the risks against my desperate need for validation. Finally, I made a decision. I have to go, Mike. This might be my only chance to prove I'm not crazy. Mike looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in my expression stopped him. He nodded reluctantly. At least let me stake out the diner, keep an eye on things from a distance. I agreed, grateful for his support despite his doubts. The next day, as I sat in a booth at Rosie's Diner, my heart raced with anticipation. The bell above the door chimed, and a middle-aged woman with haunted eyes entered. She scanned the room before her gaze settled on me. Without a word, she slid into the seat across from me. Are you the one who sent the email? I asked in a low voice. She nodded, her eyes darting nervously around the diner. My name's Laura. I saw your posts on some forums asking about Oakwood Forest. You said you found a pit, with bones. I leaned forward, hope surging through me. Yes. You believe me? Laura's face tightened with pain. My brother disappeared in those woods 15 years ago. The official story was that he got lost, died of exposure. But I never believed it. What do you think happened to him? I asked, barely breathing. She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a worn journal. This was his. He was investigating something in the forest. Strange legends, old stories about cult activity. I think he got too close to the truth. As I flipped through the journal, my eyes widened. Sketches of hooded figures, maps marked with mysterious symbols, and notes about ancient rituals filled the pages. It was like looking into a mirror of my own obsessive research. There are others, Laura continued, her voice barely above a whisper. People who've had experiences they can't explain, who've lost loved ones to the forest. We've been trying to piece it all together, but it's dangerous. People who dig too deep tend to disappear. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the magnitude of what I was getting involved in. This was bigger than just my experience, bigger than I could have imagined. What can I do? I asked, determination overriding my fear. How can I help uncover the truth? Laura's eyes met mine, filled with a mix of hope and trepidation. Are you sure you want to go down this path? Once you're in, there's no going back. The deeper you dig, the more danger you'll be in. I thought of the pit, the bones, the terror of that night. I thought of the disbelief I'd faced, the doubts that had plagued me. Then I thought of all the others who might have suffered a similar fate, of the families left without answers. Taking a deep breath, I nodded firmly. I'm sure. Whatever it takes, I need to know the truth, not just for me, but for everyone who's been affected by whatever is happening in that forest. As Laura began to outline what she knew, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I was no longer alone in my quest for answers, but I was also stepping into a world of shadows and secrets that I didn't fully understand. Little did I know, this conversation was just the beginning of a journey that would test not only my sanity, but my very understanding of reality itself. The forest loomed before me, a wall of green that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. My heart raced as I stood at the trailhead, the weight of my backpack pressing down on my shoulders. Despite the warm summer day, a chill ran through my body. "You don't have to do this, Tom," Mike said, his voice tight with concern. He stood beside me, having insisted on accompanying me this far. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves. "I do, Mike. I need to face this. I need answers." Mike nodded reluctantly. "Just be careful, okay? And keep your satellite phone on. If I don't hear from you every 2 hours, I'm calling in search and rescue, no arguments." I managed a weak smile. "Deal." With a final glance at my friend, I stepped onto the trail. The sounds of civilization quickly faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. As I hiked deeper into the forest, memories of that fateful night flooded back. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every snapping twig sent my heart racing. Hours passed as I retraced my steps, searching for any sign of the pit or my original campsite. Frustration began to mount as I found nothing but endless trees and underbrush. "Come on," I muttered to myself. "It has to be here somewhere." As the afternoon wore on, I began to doubt myself. Had I misremembered the location? Was I going in circles? The forest seemed to shift and change around me, playing tricks on my senses. Just as I was about to give up for the day, I heard a sound that made me freeze in my tracks. A twig snapping, followed by the unmistakable rustle of someone moving through the underbrush. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. Then another snap, closer this time. I spun around, heart pounding, and caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. "Show yourself," I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. To my shock, an old man emerged from behind a large oak tree. He was thin and weathered, with a long gray beard and piercing blue eyes. He leaned on a gnarled walking stick, regarding me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "Ain't often we get visitors out this deep in the woods," he said, his voice gravelly with age. I stared at him, taken aback. "We? Do you live out here?" The old man chuckled, a dry sound like leaves rustling. "In a manner of speaking. Name's Ezra, and you, young fella, look like you're searching for something." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but something in Ezra's eyes, a glimmer of knowing, made me take a chance. "I'm looking for a pit," I said. "A deep hole with bones in it. I was trapped there weeks ago, but when I came back with the police, we couldn't find it." Ezra's expression darkened. He glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers, then beckoned me closer. "You shouldn't speak of such things out here," he whispered. "The forest has ears and not all of them are friendly." A chill ran down my spine. You know about the pit?" Ezra nodded slowly. I know of it. And of the ones who put you there. You're lucky to have escaped with your life, boy." My mind reeled. Here, finally, was someone who believed me, who knew the truth. "Please," I begged. "I need to know what's going on. What is this place? Who are they?" Ezra sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his many years. "It's a long and dark tale, one that goes back centuries. This forest, it ain't natural. It hides things, terrible things. And there are those who serve its darkness, who feed it with blood and bone." He paused, fixing me with an intense stare. "Are you sure you want to know more? Once you step down this path, there's no turning back. The forest will mark you, and they'll never stop hunting you." I swallowed hard, fear warring with my need for answers, but I thought of the bones in the pit, of Laura's missing brother, of all the others who had vanished in these woods. "I'm sure," I said firmly. I need to know the truth, whatever it costs me. Ezra nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. Very well. Come with me then. There's much to show you, and these woods ain't safe after dark. As I followed the old hermit deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a threshold, leaving behind the world I knew for something far stranger and more dangerous. But there was no turning back now. Whatever secrets this forest held, I was determined to uncover them no matter the cost. Little did I know, the revelations awaiting me would shake the very foundations of my reality and plunge me into a world of ancient evil and cosmic horror. Ezra's ramshackle cabin materialized out of the deepening twilight like a mirage. Built of rough-hewn logs and nestled against a sheer rock face, it seemed as much a part of the forest as the ancient trees surrounding it. Come in, quick now, Ezra urged, ushering me through the creaking door. Night's falling, and that's when they're most active. The interior was dimly lit by oil lamps, casting flickering shadows across walls covered in strange symbols and faded photographs. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and wood smoke. Sit, Ezra commanded, gesturing to a worn armchair. As I sank into it, he busied himself stoking the fire and setting a kettle to boil. Tea? He asked, not waiting for an answer. You'll need something to steady your nerves for what I'm about to tell you. I nodded absently, my eyes drawn to a large map pinned to one wall. It showed the forest, but with markings and notations I didn't understand. Ezra followed my gaze. Ah, you've noticed my life's work. 50 years of mapping the forest's secrets, its power points, its hungry places. Hungry places? I echoed, a chill running down my spine. The old man nodded gravely as he handed me a steaming mug. This forest, it ain't like others. It's old, older than you can imagine. And it's alive in a way. It feeds on fear, on pain, on death. I sipped the bitter tea, trying to process his words. But how is that possible? Ezra settled into the chair opposite me with a heavy sigh. Long ago, before the white man came, this land was sacred to the native tribes. They knew its power, respected it, kept the balance, but they also knew its dangers. He paused, his eyes growing distant. They spoke of an ancient evil, sleeping beneath the earth, a hunger that could never be satisfied. They performed rituals, made sacrifices to keep it dormant. Sacrifices? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ezra nodded grimly. Human sacrifices. But it was never enough. The hunger always grew. I thought of the pit, the bones, and shuddered. And now? What's happening now? Now? Ezra's laugh was bitter. Now we have fools who think they can control the forest's power. A cult, been operating in secret for generations. They feed the forest, thinking it'll grant them power in return. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The hooded figures, the people who attacked me. Aye, that'd be them, Ezra confirmed. They hunt in the forest, capture outsiders for their rituals. But they're just puppets, really. The forest, the hunger beneath. That's the real threat. I set down my mug, hands shaking. But why are you telling me all this? Why help me? Ezra's gaze sharpened, piercing me to my core. Because you survived, boy. You escaped the pit. Do you have any idea how rare that is? The forest marked you that night. And now you might be our only hope. Hope? For what? To end this, once and for all. Ezra stood, moving to a large trunk in the corner. He opened it, revealing an assortment of odd objects. Ancient-looking books, strange artifacts, weapons. I've spent my life studying the forest, learning its secrets, he explained. I know how to hurt it, maybe even how to kill it. But I'm old, my time is almost up. I need someone to carry on the fight. I stared at him, overwhelmed. But I'm nobody. I'm not a warrior or a scholar. I'm just a guy who went camping and got lucky. Ezra shook his head firmly. No such thing as luck in this forest. You survived for a reason. The question is, Are you willing to embrace your purpose? As I opened my mouth to respond, a bone-chilling howl split the night air. Ezra's head snapped up, fear etched across his weathered features. "They're coming," he hissed, rushing to bar the door. "They must have sensed your return." "Who's coming?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "The cult," Ezra replied grimly, tossing me a strange-looking knife from the trunk. "And they won't stop until they drag you back to that pit." As inhuman screeches and pounding footsteps approached the cabin, I gripped the knife with sweaty palms. In that moment, I realized my search for answers had led me into something far bigger and more terrifying than I could have imagined. The night ahead would test not just my courage, but my very understanding of reality. And as Ezra's words echoed in my mind, I knew that whatever happened, my life would never be the same again. The cabin shuddered under the assault of unseen forces. Ezra moved with surprising agility for his age, grabbing weapons and muttering incantations under his breath. I stood frozen, the strange knife clutched in my trembling hands. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the cacophony outside. Ezra thrust an ancient-looking book into my free hand. "Read," he commanded. "Page 47, out loud. Don't stop no matter what you hear or see." As I fumbled with the book, Ezra took up position by the door, a shotgun in one hand and what looked like a charm made of bones in the other. "But what about—" I started to ask. "Read!" Ezra bellowed. Heart pounding, I opened the book to the designated page. The text was in a language I didn't recognize, full of harsh consonants and flowing vowels. As I began to stumble through the words, the air in the cabin seemed to thicken, taking on an electric charge. Outside, the howls turned to shrieks of rage. The windows rattled in their frames, and I could hear wood splintering as something tried to force its way in. "Keep reading," Ezra shouted over the din. "Don't stop." I pressed on, the foreign words burning my throat as I spoke them. As I neared the bottom of the page, a blinding light flashed through the cracks in the walls, accompanied by an unearthly screech. Then, silence. I looked up from the book, panting. Is it over?" Ezra shook his head grimly. "Far from it. But we've bought ourselves some time." He moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "They'll be back, and in greater numbers. We need to move." "Move where?" I asked, still trying to process what had just happened. "What were those things?" "Cultists," Ezra replied, already packing supplies into a worn backpack. "Or what's left of them. The forest changes those who serve it too long." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the inhuman noises I'd heard. "Where are we going?" Ezra fixed me with a stern gaze. "To the heart of the forest. It's time you saw the truth with your own eyes." As we stepped out of the cabin, the night air hit me like a physical force. The forest seemed alive in a way I'd never experienced before, every shadow concealing potential threats. Ezra set a punishing pace, navigating the twisted paths with the confidence of long familiarity. I struggled to keep up, my mind reeling with questions. Why me? I finally managed to ask between gasps for air. Why am I so important? Ezra was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of long-held secrets. The forest, it chooses. Every few generations it marks someone who can either feed its hunger or end it. End it? I echoed, disbelieving. How? There's a ritual, Ezra explained. Ancient magic, older than the forest itself. But it requires a willing sacrifice. Someone marked by the forest, who enters its heart of their own free will. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You mean... Ezra nodded solemnly. Aye. To end this, to save countless lives, you might have to give your own. We walked in silence for a time, the gravity of the situation settling over me like a shroud. The forest pressed in around us, watchful and hungry. Suddenly, Ezra held up a hand, signaling for silence. Ahead, a clearing came into view, bathed in an unnatural, sickly green light. "We're here," Ezra whispered. "The heart of the forest." As we approached the edge of the clearing, I gasped. In the center stood an enormous gnarled tree, its bark black as night. But it wasn't the tree that drew my attention, it was what surrounded it. Hundreds of bodies, desiccated and twisted, were fused into the ground around the tree. Some were little more than skeletons, while others looked disturbingly fresh. All of them seemed to be reaching towards the tree, as if drawn by an irresistible force. "What? What is this?" I choked out, fighting the urge to vomit. "This is what the forest truly is," Ezra said grimly. "A parasite. It feeds on life, on suffering, and it's been doing so for millennia." As I stared in horror at the nightmarish scene before me, a voice spoke from the shadows behind us. "Welcome, Chosen One," it hissed, a sound like dry leaves scraping stone. "We've been waiting for you." I spun around to see a figure emerge from the darkness. It might once have been human, but now it was something else entirely. A twisted amalgamation of flesh and wood, its eyes glowing with the same sickly green light as the clearing. Ezra raised his shotgun, but the creature was faster. With a gesture, roots burst from the ground, wrapping around Ezra's legs and pulling him down. "Run, boy!" Ezra shouted as he struggled against his bonds. "Make your choice." As more figures emerged from the forest, their intentions clearly malevolent, I faced the most important decision of my life. Would I flee and save myself, or would I step into the clearing and face whatever fate awaited me there? The fate of the forest, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance, and I had only seconds to decide. Time seemed to slow as I stood at the precipice of decision. The twisted figures advanced, their grotesque forms illuminated by the sickly green glow. Ezra's shouts faded into the background as my focus narrowed to the horrific tree at the center of the clearing. In that moment, I made my choice. I ran. Not away, but straight into the heart of the nightmare. My feet pounded against the earth as I sprinted towards the enormous black tree, dodging grasping hands and writhing roots. Behind me, I heard shrieks of rage and the sound of pursuit. As I reached the edge of the bodies surrounding the tree, I hesitated for a split second. Then, gritting my teeth, I began to climb over them, trying not to think about the fact that I was scrambling across human remains. "No!" a voice howled, closer than I'd expected. "You cannot interfere!" I glanced back to see the leader of the twisted figures mere feet away, its wooden claws reaching for me. With a final burst of effort, I lunged forward and pressed my hands against the trunk of the tree. The world exploded. Green fire erupted from the point of contact, racing up the trunk and throughout the clearing. I tried to pull away, but my hands seemed fused to the bark. Pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced coursed through my body. And then I was falling, tumbling through darkness and memory. I saw the forest as it once was, pristine and full of life. I saw the first tribes arrive, their awe at the land's natural power. I witnessed the first corruption, a shaman's desperate bargain with forces beyond understanding. Centuries flashed by in seconds. I felt the forest's hunger grow, saw it twist and change the land around it. I experienced the terror of countless victims, their lives ending in that dreadful pit. And through it all, I sensed a presence, ancient, alien, and ravenous. With a jolt, I snapped back to the present. I was on my knees, hands still pressed against the tree. Around me, the clearing had transformed. The sickly green light was gone, replaced by a soft, natural glow. The twisted figures had collapsed, now nothing more than piles of decaying wood. "You did it, boy," a weak voice said behind me. I turned to see Ezra, battered but alive, limping towards me. "You broke its hold." I stared at my hands in disbelief. They were covered in a strange, silvery sap that seemed to be absorbing into my skin. What happened?" Ezra helped me to my feet, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and concern. "You completed the ritual, offered yourself willingly, but instead of consuming you, the forest changed." As if in response to his words, a tremor ran through the ground. The bodies surrounding the tree began to sink into the earth, while new growth, vibrant and healthy, sprouted in their place. "Is it over?" I asked, scarcely daring to hope. Ezra shook his head slowly. "Not over, but different. The forest is healing, returning to what it once was, but it'll need a guardian." The full impact of his words hit me. "You mean, the forest chose you for a reason, Tom," Ezra said solemnly. "You faced its darkness and emerged changed. You're connected to it now in ways even I don't fully understand." I looked down at my hands, where faint, tree-like patterns were forming on my skin. "So what happens now?" Before Ezra could answer, a new voice spoke, not with sound, but directly into my mind. It was vast and ancient, yet now tinged with something like remorse. "Now, chosen one, you learn," the voice said. "You heal what was broken. You guard against the darkness that always seeks to return." Images flashed through my mind. Hidden groves of power, secret paths through time and space, knowledge that no human was meant to possess. "Do you accept this burden?" the voice asked. I thought of all I'd be leaving behind, my old life, my family, my plans for the future. But I also thought of the lives I could save, the good I could do. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "I accept." Ezra placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'll help you, lad, for as long as I'm able, but the path ahead won't be easy." "I know," I said, surprised by the calm certainty in my voice. "But it's my path now." As if in response, the forest around us seemed to shift and breathe. New possibilities stretched out before me, as vast and mysterious as the woods themselves. My old life was over. But standing there, feeling the pulse of the forest flowing through me, I realized that an extraordinary new chapter was just beginning. "Come on," I said to Ezra, turning towards a path that hadn't existed moments before. "We have work to do." As we set off into the transformed forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger story. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them, as the reluctant but determined guardian of a forest reborn. Months passed like leaves carried on an autumn breeze. The forest, once a place of darkness and terror, was slowly transforming under my guardianship. Gone were the sickly green hues and twisted forms. In their place, vibrant life flourished, nurtured by the renewed energy flowing through the land. I stood at the edge of a crystal-clear stream, watching as silver fish darted through the water. My reflection showed a man changed, my hair now streaked with green, my eyes holding an otherworldly glimmer. Faint, tree-like patterns swirled across my skin, pulsing gently with the rhythm of the forest. "Still admiring your new look?" Ezra's gruff voice called out. The old man emerged from the tree line, looking healthier than I'd ever seen him. The forest renewal had affected him too, smoothing some of the lines from his weathered face. I smiled ruefully. "Just thinking about how much has changed." Ezra nodded, his eyes distant. "Aye, and not just here. Word's spreading in the outside world. People are starting to notice something's different about these woods." A pang of homesickness hit me. "Have you heard anything from your family?" Ezra finished gently. "They're still looking for you, lad. Your friend Mike's leading the charge. They haven't given up." I sighed, conflict churning inside me. Part of me longed to return, to explain everything. But I knew that wasn't possible. My path lay here now. As if sensing my thoughts, a warm presence brushed against my mind. The voice of the forest, once alien and terrifying, had become a constant companion. "They cannot understand," it whispered. "Your old life is past, but perhaps a message?" I perked up at the idea. "Ezra, do you think we could—" My words were cut short by a sudden tremor in the ground. The stream's water rippled ominously, and birds took flight in a cacophony of alarmed cries. "What was that?" Ezra asked, looking around warily. I closed my eyes, Reaching out with my newfound senses, the forest's energy swirled around me, carrying whispers of warning and danger. "Something's wrong," I muttered, my eyes snapping open. "This way." We raced through the woods, branches seeming to part before us as we ran. As we neared our destination, I could hear voices, angry, determined, and unmistakably human. We emerged at the edge of a small clearing to find a group of people gathered around a pulsing node of forest energy. One of them, a woman in her 40s with a hard set to her jaw, was reading from an all-too-familiar book. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the intruders flinch. The woman's eyes widened as she took in my appearance. "It's true," she breathed. "The Guardian." "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded, feeling the forest's agitation grow around us. A man stepped forward, his face twisted with grief and rage. "We're finishing what our ancestors started. This forest has taken too much from us. It needs to be destroyed." With a shock, I recognized him, Laura's brother, the one she'd thought lost to the forest years ago. "You don't understand," I said, trying to project calm. "The forest has changed. It's not the same entity that hurt you." "Lies," the woman spat. "We've seen the signs. The old power is weakening. Now's our chance to end this once and for all." She raised the book again, but before she could speak, roots burst from the ground, wrapping around her legs. Similar tendrils ensnared the rest of the group. "Let them go," I commanded, and the forest reluctantly obeyed. "Listen to me. I know you've suffered, I know you're afraid, but destroying the forest isn't the answer." "Then what is?" Laura's brother asked, his voice breaking. "How many more lives will it take?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my responsibility settle on my shoulders. "Let me show you," I said softly. "Let me show you what the forest has become." Extending my hands, I let the forest's energy flow through me. The clearing filled with shimmering images, wildlife thriving, ecosystems healing, the land pulsing with renewed vitality. "This is what your pain and sacrifice bought," I explained. "A chance for redemption, for healing." The group stared in awe at the display. I could see the conflict in their eyes, years of fear and hatred warring with the evidence before them. "The choice is yours," I continued. "You can cling to the past, or you can be part of building a better future, one where the forest protects instead of harms." A tense silence fell over the clearing. The fate of the forest, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance once again. As I waited for their decision, I couldn't help but wonder, would this be the beginning of a new era of understanding, or the spark that ignited an even greater conflict? Only time would tell, and as the guardian of Oakwood Forest, I would face whatever came with newfound strength and purpose. The tension in the clearing was palpable as the group of would-be destroyers grappled with the revelation before them. I held my breath, acutely aware of how this moment could shape the future of the forest and beyond. Finally, Laura's brother, whom I now knew as David, stepped forward. His eyes, once filled with rage, now shimmered with unshed tears. "I've spent years hating this place," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "blaming it for everything I've lost. But this isn't the forest I remember." The woman who had been reading from the book scoffed. "Don't be fooled, David. It's a trick. It has to be." I shook my head, letting more of the forest's energy flow through me. The air around us filled with soft, glowing motes of light. "No tricks," I said gently. "Only truth. The forest remembers the harm it caused, the lives it took. It wants to make amends." As if in response, a tendril of energy reached out towards David. He flinched at first, then slowly extended his hand. The moment they touched, he gasped. "Laura," he breathed. "I can feel her. She's at peace." Murmurs ran through the group as David's words sank in. I could see the doubt and hostility in their eyes beginning to waver. Ezra, who had been quietly observing, chose this moment to speak up. "I've watched this forest for longer than any of you have been alive," he said. his gravelly voice carrying the weight of decades. I've seen its darkness, its hunger, but I've also seen its potential for good. What's happening now? It's a miracle, one we shouldn't squander. The woman with the book, their leader, I realized, looked torn. But all our preparations, our plans, can be put to better use, I finished for her. Your knowledge, your connection to the old ways, it could be invaluable in helping to guide the forest's rebirth. A younger member of the group, a girl who couldn't have been more than 18, stepped forward. I want to learn, she said, her eyes bright with curiosity. If the forest is changing, I want to be part of it. One by one, the others began to nod in agreement. The tide was turning. Their leader, however, remained skeptical. And if this is all some elaborate deception? If the forest reverts to its old ways? I met her gaze steadily. Then I'll be the first line of defense. I've been chosen as the guardian, and I swear to you I will protect both the forest and humanity, even if it costs me my life. My words hung in the air, and I could feel the forest's approval humming through me. After a long moment, the woman slowly closed her book. Very well, she said. We'll give this a chance, but we'll be watching. Relief washed over me. Thank you, I said sincerely. Now let me show you what we can accomplish together. Over the next few hours, I guided the group through the transformed forest. We visited healing groves, witnessed the purification of once tainted streams, and even communed with some of the gentler spirits that now called the woods home. As the sun began to set, casting the forest in a warm, golden glow, David approached me. I never thought I'd say this, he began, but I think I'm ready to forgive. Not just the forest, but myself. For giving up, for not searching harder for answers. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the forest's energy flow between us. The past is past, I said. What matters is what we do now, moving forward. As our new allies prepared to leave, making plans to return and learn more, Ezra pulled me aside. You've done well, lad, he said, pride evident in his voice. But this is just the beginning. There will be others who won't be so easily convinced. And the forest, for all its changes, still holds many secrets. I nodded, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the thrill of purpose. I know, but for the first time since this all began, I feel like we're on the right path. As twilight deepened into night, I stood at the edge of the clearing, watching as our former enemies turned potential allies made their way back to the world beyond the trees. The forest hummed with renewed energy, and I could sense both excitement and apprehension for the challenges that lay ahead. A cool breeze rustled through the leaves, carrying with it a whisper of ancient wisdom. The journey of healing has begun, the forest's voice murmured in my mind. But the true test is yet to come. I squared my shoulders, ready to face whatever the future might hold. The guardian of Oakwood Forest had taken a crucial first step, but the path ahead promised to be long and fraught with challenges. Yet as I gazed out at the vibrant, transformed woodland, I knew that every step would be worth it. The night deepened, and I turned back to the heart of the forest, ready to continue my vigil and prepare for the dawn of a new era. The seasons turned, and with them, the forest continued its transformation. Autumn painted the leaves in brilliant hues of red and gold, winter blanketed the ground in pristine snow, and spring burst forth with new life and vibrant growth. As summer approached once more, I found myself marveling at how much had changed in just a year. I stood at the edge of a newly formed glade, watching as a group of former cultists turned students learned the art of communing with the gentler spirits of the forest. Ezra supervised, his weathered face creased with a mixture of pride and caution. Remember, he called out, respect is key. The spirits aren't your servants, they're your partners in maintaining the balance. As I observed the lesson, I felt a familiar presence brush against my mind. The forest's voice, once so alien, now felt as natural as my own thoughts. Guardian, it whispered, trouble approaches. from the world beyond. I frowned, extending my senses outward. At the edges of my awareness, I could feel a disturbance, a group of people entering the forest, their intentions unclear but their emotions tumultuous. "Ezra," I called, "we've got company. Can you handle things here?" The old man nodded, understanding immediately. "Go. We'll be ready if you need us." I took off through the trees, my feet barely touching the ground as the forest seemed to speed my journey. As I neared the source of the disturbance, I could hear raised voices. "This is insanity, Mike. We've been searching for months. Tom is gone, and this fairy tale about a transformed forest isn't going to bring him back." I froze, recognizing the voice of my sister, Sarah. And she'd said Mike's name. My best friend was here too. Taking a deep breath to center myself, I stepped into view. "Hello, Sarah. Mike. It's been a while." The small search party fell silent, staring at me in shock. I knew what they saw. My appearance had changed dramatically since I'd become the forest's guardian. My hair was longer, streaked with green, and my eyes held an otherworldly glimmer. The tree-like patterns on my skin seemed to shift and move in the dappled sunlight. "Tom," Mike whispered, his face pale. "Is that really you?" Sarah's expression hardened. "What happened to you? What has this place done to you?" I held up my hands in a placating gesture. "I know this must be a shock, but I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I've found my purpose here." "Purpose?" Sarah scoffed. "You disappeared without a trace. We thought you were dead, and now we find you playing some kind of a forest shaman." "It's not like that," I tried to explain. "The forest has changed. I've changed. I'm its guardian now, helping to heal the land and protect people from the dangers that still linger." Mike took a hesitant step forward. "The rumors about the forest coming alive, about miracles and magic, they're true?" I nodded, allowing a small smile to cross my face. "Would you like me to show you?" Before anyone could respond, a piercing scream cut through the air. One of the search party members, a young man I didn't recognize, had wandered off and stumbled into a patch of remnant darkness, a pocket of the old, hungry forest that we hadn't yet cleansed. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards the sound, calling upon the forest's power. Green energy surged around me as I approached the writhing mass of shadows that was trying to engulf the terrified man. "Enough!" I commanded, my voice resonating with otherworldly authority. I thrust my hands forward. The seasons had turned twice since the confrontation in the clearing. Autumn painted the forest in vibrant hues of red and gold, a stark contrast to the sickly greens that had once dominated the landscape. I stood atop a rocky outcrop, surveying the transformed woodland that had become my home and responsibility. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Ezra's voice came from behind me. The old man had become my mentor and closest ally in this new life. I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. It never ceases to amaze me how much has changed. Ezra joined me at the edge of the outcrop, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Aye, but change brings its own challenges. You've felt it too, haven't you?" My smile faded. Of course I had felt it. A growing tension in the air, a sense of unease rippling through the forest's energy. "Something's coming," I said quietly. Something big. As if in response to my words, a distant rumble shook the ground. Birds took flight in alarm, their cries echoing through the trees. Ezra's face hardened. "Looks like something is here sooner than we thought. Come on." We raced down the outcrop, the forest seeming to part before us as we ran. As we neared the source of the disturbance, I could hear the unmistakable sound of heavy machinery. We burst into a clearing to find a scene of chaos. A group of workers, supervised by men in suits, were operating bulldozers and excavators. They had already carved a deep gash into the earth, dangerously close to one of the forest's most powerful energy nodes. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made several workers step back in alarm. One of the suited men, a sharp-featured individual with cold eyes, stepped forward. Ah, the famous Guardian makes an appearance, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I was wondering when you'd show up. I struggled to contain my anger, feeling the forest's distress pulsing through me. What do you think you're doing? This land is protected. The man smiled, a predatory expression that sent chills down my spine. Protected by what? Superstition? Folktales? I have contracts, permits, and a team of lawyers who say otherwise. This land is slated for development and no tree-hugging hippie is going to stand in our way. Ezra stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what forces you're messing with, boy. The man's smile didn't waver. Oh, but I do. In fact, I'm counting on it. He snapped his fingers and 2 more figures emerged from the tree line. My heart sank as I recognized them. The woman who had led the group of would-be destroyers, and David, Laura's brother. Both looked conflicted but determined. You see, the suited man continued, not everyone was convinced by your little light show. Some people still remember what this forest really is, a monster that needs to be put down. David stepped forward, his eyes pleading. I'm sorry, but we can't take the risk. What if the forest reverts? What if all those deaths were for nothing? I shook my head, feeling a deep sadness well up inside me. David, please. You've seen the changes. You've felt your sister's peace. Don't throw that away. The woman spoke up, her voice hard. We've made our choice. The forest has to go, for the good of everyone. As they argued, I felt a shift in the energy around us. The forest was responding to the threat, and not in a way I had expected. The ground began to tremble, and the air grew thick with an ancient power. Stop! I shouted, but it was too late. The earth split open with a deafening crack, swallowing one of the bulldozers whole. Vines erupted from the ground, wrapping around the workers and machines. The suited man stumbled back, his composure finally breaking. What have you done? He screamed at me. This isn't me, I said, struggling to control the surging energy. It's the forest. It's protecting itself. As chaos erupted around us, I realized with growing horror that the delicate balance we had achieved was teetering on the brink. The forest's old instincts were resurfacing, driven by the very real threat to its existence. In that moment, I understood the true test of my role as guardian. It wasn't just about protecting the forest from outside threats. It was about protecting humanity from the forest's ancient, terrible power. As the clearing descended into pandemonium, I knew that the choices I made in the next few moments would determine the fate of not just Oakwood Forest, but potentially the entire world. The true battle for the soul of the forest had begun, and I was caught in the center of the storm. Chaos reigned in the clearing as the forest's ancient power surged unchecked. Workers screamed, fleeing from writhing vines and cracking earth. The suited man stumbled backwards, his face pale with terror. David and the woman who had once led the forest's opponent stood frozen, their expressions a mix of fear and grim vindication. I closed my eyes, reaching deep into the connection I shared with the forest. Its energy roiled with fear, anger, and an instinctive drive to protect itself. Beneath it all, I sensed a flicker of the consciousness I had come to know, confused, hurting, and desperate. Stop, I shouted, my voice carrying the weight of my role as guardian. This isn't the way. For a moment, the chaos seemed to pause. Then a deep, rumbling voice that only I could hear responded. They threaten us. They would destroy all we have built. We must protect ourselves. I shook my head, projecting my thoughts back. Not like this. Remember what we've worked for. Remember the balance. The forest's energy pulsed uncertainly. I seized the moment, turning to address everyone in the clearing. Listen to me, all of you, I said, my voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. This is what fear and misunderstanding bring. Destruction, chaos. Is this really what any of us want? The suited man, having regained some of his composure, snarled, What I want is for this freakish forest and its pet hippie to get out of my way. Do you have any idea how much money is at stake here? Ezra stepped forward, his eyes blazing. Money? You'd risk unleashing forces beyond your comprehension for money? Enough, I shouted, feeling the forest's energy surge again in response to the rising tensions. I turned to David and the woman. You've seen what the forest has become. You've felt the healing it can bring. Are you really willing to destroy all of that out of fear of what might happen? David's resolve seemed to waver. But what if it turns back? What if we're just setting ourselves up for more tragedy? I met his gaze steadily. Then I'll be here. We'll be here. To guide it, to maintain the balance. But we can't do that if you destroy everything. The woman spoke up, her voice shaky but determined. How can we trust you? How do we know you won't be corrupted by its power? A sad smile crossed my face. You don't. You can't. Trust is a choice we make despite our fears. I'm choosing to trust in the forest's capacity for good. I'm asking you to do the same. As I spoke, I felt the forest's energy begin to calm. The vines slowly retreated, and the rumbling earth stilled. In the sudden quiet, the weight of the moment pressed down on all of us. The suited man broke the silence with a bitter laugh. Pretty words, but they don't change the fact that I have legal rights to this land. Your trust and balance won't stand up in court. Ezra stepped forward, a glint in his eye. Perhaps not. But I suspect the evidence of unexplained seismic activity and dangerous sinkholes might give your investors pause, not to mention the potential for some interesting media coverage. The man's face paled as he considered the implications. I seized the opportunity. Here's what's going to happen, I said, infusing my words with the authority of the Guardian. You're going to leave, all of you. Take your machines and your plans and go. In return, we won't pursue any action against you for the damage you've already caused. And if we refuse? The suited man challenged, though his bravado was clearly faltering. In response, I let a fraction of the forest's power flow through me. The air crackled with energy, and my eyes glowed with an inner light. Then you'll see firsthand what this forest is truly capable of, and believe me, you don't want that. For a tense moment, I thought he might push back. Then, with a muttered curse, he turned to his workers. Pack it up, we're done here. As the development team began to withdraw, I turned to David and the woman. And you? What will you choose? David looked at the retreating workers, then back at the forest. I need time to think, to process all of this. The woman nodded slowly. We'll be watching, but perhaps we judged too hastily. As they too prepared to leave, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The immediate crisis had been averted, but I knew this was just the beginning. Ezra placed a hand on my shoulder. Well done, lad, but this won't be the last challenge we face. I nodded, gazing out at the forest as it settled back into an uneasy calm. I know, but for now, we've bought ourselves some time. Time to strengthen the balance, to deepen our understanding. As twilight fell over the woods, I could feel the forest's consciousness reaching out to me. There was gratitude there, and a renewed commitment to the path of healing we had chosen together. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges both from within and without. But standing there, feeling the pulse of life all around me, I knew that every struggle would be worth it. For in protecting the forest, we were protecting something far greater, the delicate balance between humanity and nature, and the hope for a future where both could thrive in harmony. The weeks following the confrontation in the clearing passed in a blur of activity. Word of the incident spread, drawing curiosity seekers and skeptics alike to the edges of Oakwood Forest. I found myself constantly on guard, patrolling the boundaries and soothing the forest's lingering unease. One crisp autumn morning, I stood at the forest's edge, watching as a small group of people approached. To my surprise, I recognized David among them, along with the woman who had once led the opposition against the forest. They were accompanied by a diverse group, scientists, local officials, and even a few journalists. As they drew near, David stepped forward, his expression a mix of apprehension and determination. "We've come to talk," he said, "and to see for ourselves what's really happening here." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "I'm glad you came. There's much to show you." As we prepared to enter the forest, Ezra emerged from the tree line, his weathered face creased with concern. "Are you sure about this, lad?" he murmured. "Bringing outsiders in, it's a risk." "A necessary one," I replied quietly. "If we want to protect the forest, we need allies. Understanding?" Ezra nodded grudgingly. "Just be careful. The balance is still fragile." With that warning in mind, I led the group into the heart of Oakwood. As we walked, I could feel the forest's energy swirling around us, curious and cautious. One of the scientists, a botanist by the looks of her equipment, gasped as we entered a clearing filled with vibrant, otherworldly flora. "This is incredible," she breathed. "Some of these species, they shouldn't be possible." "The forest creates its own rules," I explained, running my hand along a shimmering, iridescent leaf. "It's constantly evolving, adapting." A local official, his brow furrowed, spoke up. "But how can we be sure it's safe? After everything that's happened in the past." I met his gaze steadily. "The forest remembers its past, the harm it caused. That's why it's working so hard to change, to heal." As if in response to my words, a soft glow began to emanate from the plants around us. The air filled with motes of light, dancing around the awestruck visitors. "It's beautiful," David whispered, his eyes wide. The woman who had once opposed us stepped forward, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. "I want to believe," she said softly, "but I've seen the darkness this place is capable of. How can we trust that it won't return?" I took a deep breath, considering my words carefully. "The potential for darkness exists in all things," I said. "In the forest, in humanity. The key is choice. Every day, the forest chooses to embrace healing over harm. And every day we can choose to work with it, rather than against it." As we continued our tour, I could see the visitors' skepticism slowly giving way to wonder. We witnessed animals thought to be extinct, thriving in hidden glades, saw polluted streams transformed into crystal-clear waters with healing properties. Near the end of our journey, we approached the massive black tree that had once been the center of the forest's malevolent power. Now it pulsed with a warm, golden light. "This is the heart of the forest," I explained. "Once a source of corruption, now a wellspring of renewal." As the group gazed in awe at the transformed tree, I felt a familiar presence brush against my mind. The forest's consciousness, stronger and clearer than ever before. "They begin to understand," it whispered. "But the true test is yet to come." Before I could ask what it meant, a commotion from the edge of the clearing caught everyone's attention. A group of people burst through the undergrowth, led by the suited man from the development company. His face was twisted with rage and fear. "There!" he shouted, pointing at me. "The so-called Guardian. I told you all, this place is an abomination." The winter solstice arrived, bringing with it the longest night of the year. Snow blanketed the forest, transforming the landscape into a silent, white wonderland. I stood at the edge of a frozen lake, my breath misting in the frigid air. The past months had been a whirlwind of activity, negotiating with local authorities, fending off curious researchers, and deepening my connection with the forest. Quite the sight, isn't it? Ezra's voice broke through my reverie. The old man approached, his footsteps crunching in the snow. I nodded, a small smile playing on my lips. It never ceases to amaze me how the forest can transform itself. Ezra chuckled, but there was a hint of worry in his eyes. "Aye, but transformations can be unpredictable. Have you felt it?" My smile faded. Of course I had. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation that had been building for weeks. "Something's coming," I said quietly. "The forest is expectant." As if in response to my words, a pulse of energy rippled through the ground beneath our feet. The ice on the lake cracked, a spider web pattern spreading across its surface. Ezra's eyes widened. Looks like something isn't waiting any longer. Come on. We raced through the snowy woods, branches seeming to part before us. As we neared the heart of the forest, I could hear a low, thrumming sound that seemed to resonate in my very bones. We burst into the central clearing to find a scene of wonder and terror. The massive black tree at the center was pulsing with light, its branches writhing as if caught in a storm. Around it, the snow had melted, revealing a circle of lush green grass. And there, standing before the tree, was a figure I never expected to see again. "Laura?" I gasped, recognizing David's long-lost sister. The woman turned, and I realized my mistake. Though she bore a striking resemblance to Laura, this being was clearly something other. Her eyes glowed with an inner light, and her form seemed to shimmer and shift, as if not quite solid. "Not Laura," the being said, her voice a chorus of whispers. "But born from her memory, and the memories of all those the forest has taken." Ezra stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. What are you?" The being smiled, a gesture both beautiful and terrifying. "I am the forest's conscience given form, the accumulated wisdom and regret of centuries." I felt the forest's energy surging around us, more potent than I'd ever experienced. "Why now?" I asked. "Why appear like this?" "Because a choice must be made," the being replied. "The forest stands at a crossroads. It can continue on this path of healing, of symbiosis with humanity, or it can reclaim its old power, become once again the thing of nightmares and legends." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. "And you're here to... what? Force that choice?" The being shook her head. "No, Guardian. I am here to offer you a choice." With a wave of her hand, the air shimmered, and I saw two visions side by side. In one I saw the forest as it was now, but more vibrant, more alive. Humans and nature coexisting in perfect harmony. In the other I saw the forest of old, dark, powerful, feared and worshipped in equal measure. "The forest's fate rests in your hands," the being said. "Choose the path of balance and I will remain, a constant reminder of the past and a guide for the future. Choose the path of power, and I will dissolve, taking with me the forest's newfound conscience." I stared at the visions, my mind reeling. Why me? Why not let the forest choose for itself? The being's expression softened. "Because you, Tom, represent the best of both worlds. Human, yet connected to the forest in a way no one has been before. Your choice will shape not just this forest, but the relationship between humanity and nature for generations to come." Ezra placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is a heavy burden, lad, but if anyone can make this choice, it's you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me. The forest's energy swirled around me, filled with conflicting desires, the urge to protect, to grow, but also to dominate, to return to its former glory. When I opened my eyes, I met the being's gaze steadily. "I choose." But before I could finish, a commotion at the edge of the clearing caught our attention. To my shock, I saw David stumbling through the snow, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the scene before him. "Laura," he gasped, echoing my earlier mistake. The being turned, her expression a mix of sorrow and joy. "Brother," she whispered. As David fell to his knees, overcome with emotion, I realized that the choice before me had just become infinitely more complicated. The fate of the forest, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance, and now a very human element had been added to the equation. The longest night of the year stretched out before us, promising to be one of revelations, hard truths, and decisions that would echo through time. As the forest held its breath around us, I steeled myself for whatever might come next. The clearing pulsed with otherworldly energy as David stumbled towards the being that resembled his sister. Tears streamed down his face, a mix of joy and disbelief etched in his features. "Laura," he choked out. "Is it really you?" The being's expression softened, a sad smile playing on her lips. "Not exactly, brother. I am an echo, a memory given form by the forest's power and regret." David's steps faltered, confusion replacing his initial elation. "I don't understand. What's happening here?" I stepped forward, feeling the weight of my role as guardian more heavily than ever. "David," I said gently, "there's a lot to explain, but right now, we're at a crucial moment. A choice needs to be made that will affect the future of the forest and possibly the world." The being that wasn't quite Laura nodded, her ethereal form shimmering in the moonlight. "The guardian speaks truth. Time grows short, and the decision cannot wait." Ezra, who had been watching silently, spoke up. "Perhaps this is no coincidence. David's arrival, it could be part of the forest's plan." I considered his words, feeling the forest's energy shift and swirl around us. "You might be right. David, you've seen both sides of the forest, its darkness and its potential for good. Your perspective could be valuable here." David tore his gaze away from the being, looking at me with a mix of awe and trepidation. What kind of choice are we talking about?" I took a deep breath, gesturing to the vision still shimmering in the air. "The forest stands at a crossroads. It can continue on its path of healing and coexistence with humanity, or it can reclaim its old power and become once again a force of fear and domination." The being stepped closer, her voice a chorus of whispers. "The choice falls to the guardian." The fog rolled in thick and heavy, blanketing the small coastal town in an eerie silence. Amelia stood at the edge of the pier, her eyes straining to see beyond the veil of mist that obscured the churning sea. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders, shivering not just from the cold, but from the weight of what she was about to do. "Are you sure about this?" Jake's voice cut through the stillness laced with concern. Amelia turned to face her longtime friend, his features barely visible in the gloom. "I have to know, Jake. I've come too far to turn back now." He sighed, running a hand through his salt-crusted hair. "I get it, but this could change everything. Are you prepared for that?" She smiled wryly. "Nothing's been the same since that night anyway. Might as well see it through." As if on cue, a low horn sounded in the distance. A shape began to materialize out of the fog, the outline of a boat approaching the pier. Amelia's heart raced as it drew closer, the gentle lapping of waves against the hull the only sound in the otherwise silent world. The boat bumped gently against the pier's edge. A figure emerged from the cabin, tall and broad-shouldered. As he stepped onto the dock, the mist seemed to part around him, revealing a weathered face etched with lines of both laughter and sorrow. "Hello, Amelia," the man said, his voice gravelly yet warm. "It's been a long time." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "Dad?" He nodded, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm sorry it took so long for me to come back." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, a maelstrom of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Anger, relief, confusion, and love all warred for dominance. 15 years, she whispered. "You've been gone 15 years. Her father stepped closer, hesitating before reaching out to touch her arm. "I know, and I owe you more explanations than I could ever give. But I'm here now if you'll let me try." Jake cleared his throat awkwardly. "Should I, give you two some privacy?" Amelia shook her head, gripping Jake's hand tightly. "No. Stay, please." Her father's eyes flickered to their joined hands, a flicker of something. Recognition? Approval? Passing over his face. "You must be Jake. Amelia's mother told me about you in her letters." "You've been in contact with Mom?" Amelia's voice rose sharply. "All this time?" Her father held up his hands placatingly. "Not exactly. It's complicated, sweetheart. There's so much I need to tell you, but this isn't the place. Will you come with me? Just for a little while? Amelia hesitated, looking from her father to the boat and back again. Jake squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I'll be right here if you need me," he murmured. Taking a deep breath, Amelia nodded. "All right, but I want answers. Real ones this time." Her father's relief was palpable. "Of course. You deserve nothing less." As they boarded the boat, the fog began to lift, revealing glimpses of a starry sky above. The engine rumbled to life and they pulled away from the pier, Jake's silhouette growing smaller in the distance. Inside the cabin, Amelia's father gestured for her to sit. He busied himself with something at a small galley kitchen, his back to her. When he turned, he was holding 2 steaming mugs. "Hot chocolate," he said, offering her one. "You used to love it on cold nights. I hope you still do." Amelia accepted the mug, inhaling the rich, familiar scent. It transported her instantly to childhood memories, happier times before the mystery and pain of her father's disappearance. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father sat across from her, cradling his own mug. "It wasn't by choice, Amelia. Leaving you and your mother. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. But I had to protect you." "Protect us from what?" He took a long sip of his hot chocolate, as if gathering his thoughts. "I worked for an organization, a secret one. We were developing technology that could change the world, but some people wanted to use it for less than noble purposes." Amelia leaned forward, her earlier anger giving way to curiosity. "What kind of technology?" "Time manipulation," he said quietly. "We thought we could use it to prevent disasters, save lives. But in the wrong hands, it could be catastrophic," Amelia finished, her mind reeling. Her father nodded grimly. "Exactly. When I realized how dangerous it had become, I destroyed my research and went into hiding. But they never stopped looking for me, or for you and your mother." Amelia's hand shook, nearly spilling her hot chocolate. "Are we still in danger?" "No," he said firmly. "Not anymore. That's why I'm here now. It's finally safe for me to come back, to explain everything." Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks. "I thought you'd abandoned us, that you didn't love us anymore." Her father reached across the table, grasping her free hand in both of his. "Never. Not for a single moment. Everything I did was to keep you safe, to give you a chance at a normal life." As the boat gently rocked beneath them, father and daughter began the long process of healing, of bridging the gap that 15 years of absence had created. Outside, the last wisps of fog dissipated, revealing the morning sun glinted off the water as Amelia and her father made their way back to shore. The events of the previous night still swirled in her mind, a mix of revelation and lingering questions. As they approached the pier, she could see Jake waiting, his familiar form a comforting sight after the emotional turbulence of the past few hours. "You okay?" Jake asked as Amelia stepped onto the wooden planks, concern etched on his face. She nodded, managing a small smile. "I think so. It's a lot to process." Her father climbed up behind her, casting a wary glance around the quiet harbor. "We should move somewhere more private," he said in a low voice. "There's still more to discuss." Jake raised an eyebrow. "My place isn't far. It's nothing fancy, but it's secure." Amelia's father nodded gratefully. "Lead the way." As they walked through the sleepy town, Amelia found herself hyper-aware of their surroundings. Every passing car, every stranger on the street suddenly seemed like a potential threat. She shook her head, trying to dispel the paranoia. "So," Jake said, breaking the tense silence. "Time manipulation, huh? That's quite something." Amelia's father chuckled humorlessly. "That's one way of putting it. It was supposed to be our greatest achievement. Instead, it became our greatest burden." They arrived at Jake's modest apartment, a cozy space filled with mismatched furniture and the faint scent of coffee. As they settled in the living room, Amelia couldn't help but notice her father's restless gaze, constantly scanning the windows and doors. "Dad," she said softly, "are you sure we're safe now?" He turned to her, his expression softening. "As sure as I can be. But old habits die hard, I'm afraid." Jake returned from the kitchen with mugs of fresh coffee. "So what's the plan now? I mean, you can't exactly go back to your old life, can you?" Amelia's father shook his head. "No, that life is gone. But I'm hoping to build a new one. If you'll have me, Amelia." She felt tears pricking at her eyes again. "Of course I will. But Mom, does she know you're back?" A shadow passed over her father's face. "Not yet. I wanted to see you first to explain. Your mother, she may not be as forgiving." "You can't know that until you try," Amelia insisted. "She deserves to know the truth, too." Her father nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. But there's something else we need to discuss first." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, metallic device about the size of a pocket watch. "This is the only piece of the time manipulation technology that still exists." Jake leaned forward, eyes wide. "Whoa, that little thing can alter time?" "In a manner of speaking," Amelia's father explained. "It can't send a person through time, but it can create bubbles, pockets where time moves differently. It's incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands." Amelia stared at the device, a mix of fascination and fear coursing through her. "Why did you keep it? I thought you destroyed everything." Her father's expression turned grim. "As a failsafe, and as proof, in case I ever needed to convince the right people of the danger." He held it out to her. "But I can't be its keeper anymore. That responsibility needs to pass to someone else. Someone I trust completely." Amelia's hand shook as she reached for the device. "Me? But I don't know anything about this technology. How can I possibly—" A sudden crash interrupted her words as the apartment door burst open. 3 figures in dark clothing rushed in, faces obscured by masks. "Give us the device," one of them shouted, brandishing a weapon. In an instant, chaos erupted. Jake lunged for the intruder closest to him, tackling him to the ground. Amelia's father sprang into action with surprising agility, engaging another attacker. "Amelia, run!" her father yelled, struggling with his opponent. Heart pounding, Amelia clutched the time device and bolted for the fire escape. She could hear shouts and the sounds of struggle behind her as she clambered down the metal stairs, her mind racing. Who were these people? How had they found them so quickly? As her feet hit the alley below, she heard heavy footsteps pursuing her. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to focus, to keep moving. The weight of the device in her hand seemed to grow heavier with each step. Rounding a corner, she found herself face to face with a 4th assailant. Before she could react, he grabbed her arm, reaching for the device. "No!" Amelia cried, desperately trying to break free. Suddenly, the world around her seemed to shimmer and distort. The device in her hand grew warm, then hot. A blinding flash of light erupted, and Amelia felt herself falling, tumbling through a vortex of swirling colors and fractured time. When the light faded and her vision cleared, Amelia found herself still in the alley. But something was different. The air felt charged, electric. And the sounds of the city, they seemed off, somehow distorted. Shakily, she got to her feet, looking around in confusion. The attacker was gone. In fact, there was no sign of pursuit at all. But as she emerged onto the street, her blood ran cold. The town she saw before her was both familiar and utterly foreign. Cars she didn't recognize lined the roads. Storefronts that shouldn't exist stood proudly on corners, and a large digital display on a nearby building showed a date that made her heart stop: July 24th, 2034, exactly 10 years in the future. Clutching the now silent device, Amelia realized with a mix of terror and awe that her journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. Amelia stumbled down the unfamiliar yet eerily familiar streets of her hometown, her mind reeling from the impossible reality she now faced. The device in her hand remained cool and inert, offering no clues as to how to reverse what had happened. As she walked, she couldn't help but notice the subtle changes around her. Sleek, silent vehicles glided by on the roads. Holographic advertisements flickered in shop windows. People walked past, their clothing styles just slightly off from what she was used to. Okay,